Welcome back, students, to the next session of your English literature, A Face in the Dark. While we are doing this, let me get back to story in Synopsis. The story is set on a dark windy night when an Anglo-Indian teacher, Mr. Oliver, was walking through the forest to return to his school. As he was walking down the narrow path, he saw a boy sitting alone on a rock. Oliver was surprised to see a boy sitting alone at that time of the night, and that too in the pine forest all alone. He couldn't locate anyone, and seeing a familiar cap on his head and his head hung down and holding his face in the hands, he got little inquisitive. So Oliver stopped near the boy and asked him what he was doing at this spot at that time of night, and why was he crying. The boy neither looked up nor did he answer. In fact, he continued to sob and weep. Oliver, again, out of curiosity, inquisitiveness, and concern, he inquired him what was the matter, what was troubling him, and asked him to look up. Then the boy obeyed him, and he removed his hand from his face and looked up. As the light from Oliver's torch fell on boy's face, Oliver was stunned to see that boy had no face at all. It was without eyes, ears, nose or mouth. It was a round head with a school cap. He got nervous, he was scared, and he ran in the direction calling for help. Soon he locates a lantern which is being hung in the air. He reaches there and bumps into a watchman. The watchman asks the reason, why is he so much in a panic state, and what happened, and why is he running around? Unable to understand the situation, Oliver informs him that he saw a boy in the forest who had no face. In fact, there were no features on his face. The watchman raised the lamp to his own face and asked Oliver, "Did the boy look like him?" The watchman too was without face. The wind blew and put out the lamp, and we see that the story concludes here. A few points which we need to discuss while we are dealing with this prose. The story in the dark is a strange and unusual tale, and as it is suggested by the title, which seems to be very apt. Mr. Oliver, the main character in the story, encounters a boy sitting on a rock with his head hung down and holding his face in his hands and crying. Oliver tried to inquire from him the reason for his being in the forest at night and crying. The boy doesn't reply at first, but with the second request, he looks up. As the light from Oliver's torch fell on his face, Oliver was horrified to see that he did not have a face at all, and he was featureless. Not understanding what to do, he gets scared at this scenario, and he tries to run from one end to another, calling for help. And at that moment, he bumps into a watchman. The watchman asked him why was he running. Oliver told him about the faceless boy he had met on the way. Then the watchman held the lantern to his own face and asked him if the boy was like him, without a face. And at that moment, the wind blew off the lantern. We see the boy and the watchman, who appeared to having a face in the dark, did not have a face when it was seen in light. and that's an irony. Ruskin Bond says, after dark we hear many things that seems to be mysterious and irrational, and our imaginative mind goes haywire to understand these kind of paranormal theories. We find the magic and the mystery and have no explanation of it. So, concluding with the title, A Face in the Dark is quite an apt title, and it makes the reader ponder upon the mysteries of human existence and possibility of another world outside the human world and the material world. We spoke about the title. The next part which we are going to deal is the theme. Now here, when we talk about the theme speaks about supernatural element. Ruskin Bond speaks, though he being a practical and an educated man, he doesn't believe in paranormal and ghosts, but he says that he sees them all the time. There is an imaginative world in the wood, in a bar, in a crowd outside a cinema. So it is not surprising that the realm of the supernatural finds an expression in Ruskin Bond's stories. He very skillfully uses scary techniques, haunted and eerie atmosphere pertaining to supernatural, and thus sowing a seed of suspense and fear in the minds of reader. He not only prepares the reader for something evil and unusual to come in the next part of the story. According to macabre tales, he raises the possibility of another layer of life outside the material shells, something of the soul force, the aura of a person that lingers on after the body is no more. Now these supernatural stories, it can be said that Bond attempts to find an outlet for his own loneliness. It is loneliness, isolation from the outer world, and fear that leads a man to imagine the presence of ghosts and other supernatural elements. A Face in the Dark has hues of supernatural elements, with Mr. Oliver as the central character in the story. And initially he seems to be a confident man, but later when he encounters the boy without a face, he is nervous. His imaginative self creates a scene of hauntedness, and he's scared. That was perhaps the reason that he seems to be walking through the forest on his way back to school from Shimla Bazaar every night, because he was, in the initial part, a confident man and he was a practical person. But on this particular night, it was dark, stormy, windy, and because of being a bachelor and alone, it leads him to imagine something beyond the normal life. A man without a face, a kind of ghost, something which connects it to the real world is the boy's school cap, which might have been lying on a rock. Oliver, in the flickering light of that torch, imagined a boy without a face there. Again, it was his fear that made him imagine the watchman too as being faceless like the boy. The story ends with a sense of ambiguity, making the readers ponder over the question and let them think whether it was something that Oliver had actually encountered, or it was a prank played upon him by some mischievous student. The last part, which is one of the important part, is the setting of the story. Now, as Ruskin Bond stays in the foothills of Himalayas, he belongs to Missouri. Most of the stories are set away from the urban areas. He's most of the time in the hills, in the mountains, valleys, or in the countryside. A Face in the Dark is set on the outskirts of hill station of Shimla. Here, Oliver was teaching in a boarding school, which was 3 miles away from Shimla Bazaar, and he was a regular visitor to that evening bazaars. According to the actual spirit of the story, the author has created an atmosphere in the story. It was a night time and strong winds were blowing the pine tree. They were making mysterious sad sounds, indicating that something evil was likely to happen. Eventually we see that Oliver's battery starts flickering and it runs down, creating an atmosphere and adding on to the fear and suspense. Oliver encounters a boy alone with his head hung down and holding his face in the hand. This marks the beginning of fear in Oliver. The suspense is further heightened when Oliver encounters the watchman, and he too is faceless, and he creates much more the scene of hauntedness and ghostly and supernatural when he runs and stumbles down on the path. The climax is reached when the wind blew out the lamp, leaving the readers to imagine what might have happened to Oliver. With this, we come to the end of this prose, A Face in the Dark. We'll start with the next prose, that is A Horse and the Two Goats. Till then, stay safe, stay home. Thank you.